So, let us now finish with the second part of this lecture, Models in Sciences, Models in Computer Science especially. This time we have still to solve the demarcation problem. What is a model and what is not a model at all? What has no chance to become a model? We have already learned in the previous lectures, for instance lecture 7, that we can ease our work by somehow accepting the deep model as an intrinsic part of our models, and that we can concentrate on developing the normal model only. That means in this case, of course, we have to know what is the deep model, what we can learn. One very nice approach is to start with our experience we have gained already in modeling and to develop corresponding models in an appropriate form. So I will start now with categorizing models, using this kind of categorization for model development and for resolving the demarcation problem. I think first of all I should start with a case study. That means point 5 in the agenda, and then to learn from the case study whether we have some kind of specification frames for models, and for this reason we can use patterns and stereotypes for somehow developing models. Remember, the model notion is based on that a model is an instrument in a scenario. The scenario, of course, can be anything where we use some kind of thoughts or models as origins or objects as origins. The model has in this case a function. We as a community of practice decide that this is now a model. It should be adequate and dependable. It should function properly in our scenario. It comes, however, with a background and with a context. That means in this case we have to consider all these different parts. Let's start with this case study. Conceptual models are really models. And I think the best would be to distinguish the different kinds of thoughts, model development we have. Let's start with sensing and thinking, maybe having some kind of representation enablers, something like languages, and finally maybe having a conceptual model based on the notions we have been learning in our area, in our encyclopedia, based on the terms we are using in our enablers, that means languages. Okay, let's start with conceptualization as one stereotype. We start with sensing, have a social dimension, develop our thoughts, ideas and dreams, incorporate domain situation models others have been developed, develop some kind of conceptual model, integrate whatever belongs to our culture, and finally maybe restricting the statement, the expressions to some kind of normalized language, so that this is easy to digest, easy to somehow to compute based on these language statements. And maybe finally we can use some stereotypes. Typically we start with a sensing and social dimension. We have our senses, the world is visible, it has some desires. For this reason we listen to a certain extent. What comes, we observe. The problem is, however, with listening and observing, we can only observe what is observable. That means we have directly the very nice analogy of the cave in our mind. That means in this case we don't know what is reality. We know only what we have been observing. Observing can heavily mislead. There is no cow to see here. It is only a hand with a shadow. Furthermore, we are of course bound to our social world. We are using our community. We have some tradition, some oral tradition, some written records we can use. That means in this case we have some kind of social dimension that allows us to model even without having a language in mind. That means we have our world of ideas, thoughts and dreams, and this world allows us to reason on that what we have been observing, to reason on what we have already been as a result of reasoning. That means in this case we have some perception, and reality is something else. We develop mental perception models with our biases, thoughts, processing and cognition. We might use also domain situation models that have already been developed, resulted in a number of notions, agreements, and that means in this case we could use these models as origins. Furthermore, we can use a language. Language use is of course not only bound to written stuff or to some kind of maybe written special alphabet like the notes here. It's also a way how to develop our own thoughts in the given language. The next is we have our notions we are using, our perception and domain situation models as origins. We have our language terms, so we can say what is a roof, what is some kind of, let's say, a roof model, what kind of concepts or terms we have at least in our area, and then we can say, okay, fine, we develop now a model of somehow developing a roof. We can use tools so it becomes a little bit more sophisticated. That means in this case we have a 3-panel consideration. One is the supporting perception panel, the other one is the enabling language panel, and the third one is our model panel. So it looks like a triptych as we see in churches, as we have been already considering in our conceptualization lecture. So it means in this case we have now maybe a very good number of domain situation models we can use. We have also ontologies in mind, we have our intentionality, we have a language that is maybe also normalized, based maybe on a certain number of notions, based on a mold to how to develop a solution, and then we can use the main items in our language to specify our model concepts, as we did already in the conceptualization lecture. So we have finally maybe a hospital structure model or maybe a banking model that allows us to consider what is, let's say, the most essential data in our banking system. The same can be observed in other sciences. Think for instance about medicine. You can have some kind of community, let's say in an Oxford school, you have a library, you have maybe heritage, maybe you have also very advanced material, maybe on hemodynamics. You learn, somebody teaches you, you can learn by some videos, you can learn by anything what you have for investigation and equipment, and finally you develop some kind of model. Let's say you start with a simple-minded model, then you have maybe a DNA model, then you have a cell model, then you have the muscle and the tissue model, and finally maybe you have a heart model based on the assumptions that the human heart is somehow a pump. That means in this case we do conceptual modeling essentially with a supporting panel based on the possibilities that the enabling panel provides us, and we have in this case some kind of learning model panel. We'll develop our models. The models can be a good entry point, but wrong later, like I see here with the atom model. The learning model can be very sophisticated, but typically a model should be focused, should be adequate, and should serve our purpose. That means in this case we might only somehow understand the human heart as some kind of complex pump. Okay, that leads us directly to the 4 aspects of models that we have been already considering in lecture 5. We have the representation aspect, the foundation aspect, the interaction aspect, the realization aspect. And model suites might be the most appropriate means to represent all these 4 aspects as specific components of a little bit more sophisticated model. That means in this case we have for representation the classical maybe understanding, utilization, making your own. For formalization we might have our comprehension and systematization, our computation and automatic detection, our intellectual absorption. For social aspects, in computer science we are often omitting them, but they are equally important. We have some kind of concordance and judgment, or some orientation and acceptance, or some internalization and emotional organization. In computer science we are mainly interested in handling models. That means in this case we want to apply something in a proper form. Of course, within our context, design and evolve. We want to have maybe a managed application development, or maybe a well understood based on some kind of technological issues. That means in this case we have now 4 different aspects that can be maybe used for separating different kinds, different stereotypes, or maybe developing a theory of categories of models. So we have now our representation aspect, our realization and context aspect, our foundation and sense-making aspect, and our interactions social aspect. And we can now use these 4 aspects to say what we really want, what we really accept, what we can do, what will be done now, what we did, and what will be used. That means in this case we are representing a landscape, strategy, tactics, operational, delivery, and finalized results, layer or plane for our aspects. That means in this case we have maybe a systematic means how a model can be developed and a model can be used according to what is really represented in the model. Is it only represented, or is it guiding us for realization context, or is it sense making for us, or is it somehow useful for our social environment, for our interaction with other people? Okay, so in this case we can say, okay, fine, then we have now a number of planes, 6 planes. The general model property plane, the model framing and matrix plane, as we already considered when we have been thinking a little bit about how to develop a model systematically. We have the foundation and the configuration plane, we have the model formation and the adaptation plane, we have the model delivery and generation plane, we have the model presentation and utilization plane. That means in this case we can now say what is now really important at what plane. Okay, in the landscape plane we want to have a model that is analogous and focused. Oh, these are 2 of the properties we have for our adequacy of models. And the third aspect is it serves the purpose. We are able to act based on the model. It should have an acceptable quality for our interaction and social environment, and it should be justified. And as we see, we have here nothing else as our a little bit complex but useful and very general model notion in mind. It's a landscape. That means it's in an initialization level. At the strategy plane, that means at the next strategy, at the next plane, we have of course in mind something like we should use a proper expression, a proper wording, a proper formulation. We should use and consider the mold and the context. It should be, beside being of acceptable quality, also emotionally acceptable. And of course it should be somehow systematic. So it means in this case maybe we can use some kind of orthonormalized language again. If we now go to the tactics plane, then we have of course how we express it. That means the signification in mind. We want to integrate it or infuse it into our infrastructure. We want to enhance our foundational and understanding, our meaning and thoughts. And of course we want to love a model. Let's see, better saying, we want to relish and glory what we have been reached so far. And of course a model should be somehow inspiring, encouraging and well-formed. Oh, then we can also do the same for the operational plane. Let's say for engineering. In engineering, we are interested to manage engineering in a proper way. That means we concentrate on how to do it really properly, how to act, let's say, according to the technology we have currently in our hands. For the representation, we want to have a representation that allows us to reason, to mind, to sense. And of course, in this case, we need interpretations and conceptions. And all this is, of course, dependent on our culture. That means it is culture preserving, it is stereotyped in a proper form, somehow handleable. Okay, let's go for the next plane, for the delivery plane. In the delivery plane, we say, okay, fine. It should be so that we can make our model our own at the representation level. At the technological level, it should be really properly mastered. At the delivery level, it should be also somehow corroborated in a proper form. It should be coherent. Oh my goodness, these are again properties of justification. And of course, acceptable quality is now, it should be fair and, let's say, beautiful for our community of practice. Or maybe you would say it should be gorgeous. Okay, at the usage level, or at the utilization plane, we have nothing else as it should be properly represented in a narrative, nice form based on our, let's say, enabling language settlement or setting. Then we have maybe also to accept pieces that are really ready for deployment. And of course, we want to have some kind of supporting theory, so it should be founded and well understood. And in this case, it should be inspiring, encouraging, well-formed. So we have all our properties we have been putting to the model notion represented in a different form at different aspects, for the representation aspect, for the realization and context aspect, for the foundation and sense-making aspect, and for the interaction and social aspect. That would allow us somehow maybe to categorize models, whether they are representation models, or they are realization models, or they are sense-making models, or they are maybe social models. That means in this case we have already a way, a path, how to categorize our models. Based on these aspects, of course, in the representation aspect does not exclude to consider a sense-making aspect. Okay, if we look for fine arts, then we have a funny picture. We have fine arts, like writings. They have a very nice representation aspect. And of course, also the foundation and sense-making aspect mainly in mind. The other two aspects are not really in the center of attention. If you go, however, for, let's say, manipulation, governance, or guidance, then in this case, you have a representation aspect and you have the interaction social aspect mainly in mind. If you go, let's say, for orientation models or for manipulative models, or let's say, for instance, religious models, then in this case, you have, of course, again, in mind the representation aspect and the interaction social aspect. The same we can do for guidance in daily life, again, interaction and social and representation. Or for the representation, that means you have three different kinds. You can do it in a little bit more sophisticated form. You can say, okay, fine, if I consider now, let's say, the representation aspect, let's say for problem solving, then I have different levels of majority. For the perception and utilization, maybe I should only know what is given there, or I should understand it, I should be able to apply, or I should really be able to practice, or to analyze, or to synthesize, or to evaluate. In the same way, I can say, okay, for understanding and sense making, I have also different levels of maturity for minding. Realize and inspect, consider. This could use it for the discourse, for inspection, for integration, for incorporation, for appreciation. The same would be if I want to make it my own. Of course, in this case, I should profoundly understand it. Maybe I should be able to idealize it, to refine, to formalize, to deploy it, to interpret, or to validate. That means these are different levels of maturity, and the model should support this level of majority in a proper form. The same can be done for the engineering aspect. In the engineering we can distinguish acting like a deed, or acting professionally, or do it in a very sophisticated form. That means I have been incorporating the approach into my doings. That means it is naturalized. For the last one, we require that it is based on some kind of well understood technology. Again, we have different levels of majority. Of course, most model applications don't consider well understood technology or application management. Mainly they consider only the application itself, the application of the act that is in our mind. In a similar form, we can do it also for the science layer. In the science layer we have maybe systematization, generation or conceptualization. And of course, again, at a very different majority we want to have. For comprehension, it could be individual, it could be interrelational, it could be based on concepts and rules and laws and methods. Maybe we are using even theories or systems. That means in this case we have again a way how to do it systematically. For conceptualization, we have a number of different issues that somehow direct us or give us at least possibility to evaluate that a certain model is at a certain level of majority. Ordering, categorization, classification for intellectual absorption first. Or maybe we are able even to handle it so that we can generalize it in a proper form. We can conceptualize it whenever something else comes in mind, so that we would have the highest level. The same we can do also for social life. In social life we can again distinguish three different parts: judge, affect and orient. Orientation means in this case we are able to accept it somehow. That means we are maybe able to believe or to trust, or maybe to credit even, or maybe to become a fan, that means worship, or maybe to handle the framing and the active setting, or maybe we accept it as the only possible way how to think. That means we have an exclusive school of mind and thought in the sense of Ludwig Fleck. That means in this case we have again a number of majority levels for the different aspects. And we can now require for specific models to reach at least some majority for some of the aspects, according to what we have been doing with our planes. Okay, that would allow us now to categorize the models according to the aspects in the center of the model function and the model rule in a given scenario. Okay, that means in this case maybe we have the idea to separate different kinds of models according to the aspects, according to representation, according to the activity or the context, according to sense making or the foundational aspect, or according to the social and interaction aspects. So far we see 13 main categories of models. One is a representation model, another is a prescription model, another is an explanation model that is used mainly in sciences for explaining what is, let's say, in science, scientific discourses, so we can somehow reason on that. We have guidance models, we have steering models, we have informative models, we have perception models, conceptual models, usage models, amalgam models, the main situation models, and the investigative and thought models. I think the list is a little bit too long. For this reason, maybe I choose 3, 4, 5 of these models and consider them a little bit more in detail. Let's start with a representation model. Representation models are models that are mainly oriented on representing origins, so that we can perceive and utilize or understand and mind, or we are able to use and able to make it our own. That means in this case we have again subcategories of representation models. The other aspects are not as important. for representation only models. Prescription models, that is the model kinds that we are using heavily for construction of systems. That means in this case, of course, we go to the engineering, to the context and activity dimension. How to act, how to realize the thing. That means in most cases we are in this case interested in to apply and to use the model in a proper form, to manage the model for applications in the practice. That means in this case the model has a blueprint and mediator role. Additionally, however, we have a little bit more of things to consider. We should be able to do it, and in this case it adds to the social aspect, manufacturing and being some kind of companion. And of course in this case we have also to add a little bit more for representation, for perception and utilization. This could be, let's say, a holistic model. This could be also a model suite consisting of maybe 3 different models that are tightly associated with each other. Guidance models. Guidance models are very, very common. Guidance models have a specific form as orientation models. Orientation models are a little bit more oriented on the social and interaction aspect. They should orient us. A specific kind of orientation models is religious models or ideology models. In this case we have at least to consider 2 of the dimensions. One is the representation dimension and the other one is the social and interaction dimension. In the social and interaction dimension, maybe we are not called for concordance and judgment so much. We are more called for acceptance and communicability. Or we are called for internalization and emotional organization. That means in this case we have a role governing or directing or maybe driving our fantasy. That means in this case guidance models are somehow guiding us in maybe our daily life or problem case, or let's say also in our scientific application cases.